Hey, my name's ShawNshawN. I do sell art on ShawNshawN.co and specials on eBay. Today we're going to review Hustlers. So Hustlers is a film by Lorene Scarfaria. It's produced by Jennifer Lopez. She's one of the executive producers putting their money behind it. The actors are Constance Wu as Destiny, Jennifer Lopez as Ramona, Julia Stiles is this reporter at the end of the film, Met Towley is Justice, Wai Ching Ho is Destiny's mother, and there's a whole bunch of other girls as well. So the story is of Destiny. She's kind of this up-and-coming young girl working her way up the strip club scene, and she's ended up at the best strip club of them all. And then she runs into Ramona, who's really the A-class performer of the club. And then she's like, man, how do I make more money? And she's, talking to Ramona, and she's like, oh man, can you help me out train? And so Ramona says, yeah, sure, we can help you train. So they, her and the girls kind of train her, and she gets way better. And then they team up, and they're really like, they tag team a lot of guys and do all the A+ guys in the clothes room that doesn't have any photography, so they don't get in trouble, right? And so they try to work on the really heavy hitters, and they're doing really well. And they're going after all these Wall Street guys that tend to go to these strip clubs. And it's just basically the whole investment firms goes from the bottom to the middle to the top level. And they're always trying to aim for the top level and leave the rest of the girls just to go for these middle tier guys. And it goes all fine and dandy until 2008. They have the real estate market crash, boom. And Lehman Brothers goes under, and all these Wall Street people are afraid to invest, afraid to spend money. And they're still making big money, but then they're not going to the strip clubs as much. So then they're like, oh crap, and they're trying to find regular jobs. They can't find regular jobs, so they're really struggling. They don't know how to pay the bills. And they're like, hey, I know what we can do. We can actually, let's go fish these guys. So they end up going to the bars where these guys are hanging out, but not going to the strip club, and then teasing them in there, and then get them back into the club. And then, they're starting to make more cuts that way. And so now they're really becoming the strip girls that pull the business into the club versus the club, supporting the strip girls. And so they're getting more and more money. They're doing okay, but then they're still kind of chugging along. So they're like, hey, we can make more money. We just drug these guys. So then they start drugging these guys, and then they barely get their signature on the credit card, and then just max out the credit card. And they say, oh, we don't know what happened the next day. You'd had a great time and tipped us like crazy. Like totally lying to these poor guys, and they're like architect CEOs. But then of course, they go one too far, and this guy's lost his home. His wife took away the custody of the kids, and then they take all his money, and then he can't pay his mortgage, so he's gonna lose his house again. Or so, yeah, and that's kind of trips him up. And then they have this interview at the end of the film with Julia Stiles, and she's kind of looking into why they did what they did. So this is basically the crux of the whole story. I don't know, the analysis I would say is, going into the film, I thought it was going to be more like they're pole dancers, and then they come up with some scam, this just one big scam, right? And then that's what they're talking about, but instead they kind of do a series of bigger and bigger scams, but they're really not like this one all heist. So it's more realistic in the way you'd rip someone off. You would just kind of take small hits, and then they get greedier and greedier, right? So I think that's, reality that makes sense. I want to say it's based on a true story. I don't remember if it is. I mean, it's kind of interesting in aspect of these young, uneducated girls are very beautiful, and they're desperate to make a go of it. And you're like, really? You can't marry, I don't know, some investment banker or whatever? It just seems like you'd have more options just being beautiful. It's not to say that they would have those options, but it seems like you'd have more options. But of course, you'd have to be in college or whatever. So, but it just seems weird that you'd be like the most beautiful girl on the block and then still have trouble landing the guy for a marriage. But maybe, if you make the wrong decisions in life, end up as a pole dancer, you can't really do that. So that's kind of a little bit of a thing. And there's also the kind of the theme as one of the girls, like, when she gets into pole dancing, her family finds out, and then her brothers cut her off, and her family kind of cuts her off and casts her aside. So there's definitely that kind of, once you join that world, you're kind of locked out. It's kind of like if you join prostitution, you're locked out. And it's not as bad as prostitution, but there's sometimes some prostitutes, they might have to do a blow job, oral sex, or a hand job or something. So it's just kind of sliding into the really sleazeball kind of world. They're using their looks to make money, but then they're kind of trapped because they don't have real skills to do something else besides this. So that has kind of an interesting thing. In a way, the whole movie is kind of a commentary on Melania Trump in a way. Like, as like she climbed up her way, came illegally into the States, became a model, and then she go to all these, nightclubs or whatever that the billionaires hang out, and then she landed, kind of latched on to Donald Trump, right? I mean, he was obviously after her, but at the same time, it's kind of like her view of hunting him, and latching on and ride the way to the top, right? Because I mean, she is really highly educated, so it's not like she's not educated. She has an architecture degree in multiple languages, which is tough, but you know, you hear English and you know, it sounds like she doesn't know that much, but it's just she has a really bad accent in English. So yeah, it's kind of a commentary on the gaudiness of the Trump family and, you know, the unbridled capitalism and how it just kind of self-destructs at some point. But that's really just a commentary, you know, the boom bust cycle of the market, it is what it is. But obviously when people bust, you know, people lose their house and they're like, that's kind of, they make a commentary in there like, oh, this is terrible. These guys lost all their money. They didn't want to go to jail. But, you know, in the housing market, there's really two sides of the transaction. There's the bank being greedy and, you know, loaning all this money out. But these people are putting like 5%, 1% down. It's like, really, what are they losing, you know? They didn't have anything, and then they got this fake house that they really couldn't afford because they didn't have 20% down. They had 5% down. So do you really feel sorry for the people that, you know, put a little bit of money aside? I don't know. One of the things I think they could have changed in the film, I think there's quite a lot of stripping, and I think they could have cut that down a lot. I don't, you know, it just feels like they're overkilling it at one point in the movie because it's basically the same thing over and over again. So I don't think they need that much. They could have probably beefed up more of the story of Destiny's mother abandons Destiny with her grandma and runs away, and they could have just filmed that whole sequence, maybe 5-10 minutes, and then cut back 10 minutes of the stripping. I think that would have made it way better. Because they talk about the end, but if they would have shot that in the beginning and kind of had that would have really gave a lot more momentum to why Destiny ended up into stripping. Because she has this sense of abandonment, so she doesn't value herself, and that's kind of why you end up in stripping, because you don't have a lot of self-esteem. And so you don't get that coming into the film. You don't know why she's become a dancer, except that she's, you know, looking for cash. But it would have made more sense to kind of build that story up, because that's really the crux of the story in a way. And they make it one line in the story, and I think if they would have cut back the stripping and added this segment probably in the beginning of the film, you know, would have made a lot more sense of, you know, why Destiny is in this, and then the other girl stories as well. The other thing I think, you know, I might have changed was just a little bit unrealistic at the end of the film. You know, they have a falling out, of course, because one person turns rat, but they don't really punish the rat that much. I mean, you would be totally bitter and probably hating this person that's a rat, but I don't know if she was or not. So it's kind of like this soft ending, and they're all buddy pals, and I don't know. It just seems like they may or may not have been like that. It seemed like it would be more cattier and kind of, you know, take each other out at the end. Not to say the girls are always like that, but girls do tend to be a lot of cattiness, and then they just kind of backstab. And men do the same thing, so it's not like that wouldn't happen. Which does happen in a way with some of the side characters, but, you know, the two main characters don't have this big falling out. They don't talk to each other, but it doesn't seem like that much of a punishment for going to prison. Yeah, I kind of would have done the movie a little bit different, maybe not as much foreshadowing of what happens in the end, because you know it's going to go astray at some point maybe. So I don't think you needed to show that earlier in the film. You could have pushed that all the way to the end, or started foreshadowing it later in the like Act 2, in the middle of Act 2, versus they had it all the way up in Act 1. You already see this reporter, and you're like, well, now you kind of give away the whole plot of the movie. That, not give away the plot, but you know they're going to end up in jail in the end right off the bat, and you're like, well, what's the point of that, you know? I thought it was pretty good. I think it was really amazing, Jennifer Lopez being in that shape. She's obviously a singer and, you know, dances on her own tour, so she's, you know, obviously in pretty good shape for that. But she looked really amazing in this. You know, they might have CGI'd some of the imperfections, but she looked like she was spot on, you know, really good in this film. Obviously, she could do a pull off the move, so that was really impressive. Yeah, I think that's basically it for it's a fun film. I think it was a little bit too long. They could have developed the mother story a little better. But otherwise, I think it's pretty good. I'll rate it as go. And if you want to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.